Number 10. Unus the Untouchable. Unus the Untouchable, what a wild character. An oldie and a goodie. Unus actually first appeared back in the original X-Men run, making his first appearance back in X-Men issue number 8, which after hundreds of X-Men issues is pretty old at this point. Unus himself is what he sounds like. His mutant powers allow him to become untouchable when he wishes, shielding him completely when activated. This psionic repulsion shield that he can create can be as thick or thin as he wants. Unus, whose current civilian name is Gunther Bane, has also been shown to be capable of reaching through the shield himself if needed, without dropping it entirely. Pretty powerful. It's not so powerful if someone comes and tries to make the shield something you have to deal with all the time, which is how they defeated him the first time though. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we are doing here, if you love obscure X-Men villains like me, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Nemesis. This character rose to notoriety under a different name and is commonly referred to and known by that codename, but we can't say it here on YouTube, so instead we're gonna go with this other name, Nemesis, which is also a very AOA name, so yeah. Nemesis is known in the Age of Apocalypse reality for being the son of Apocalypse. At least, the alleged son of Apocalypse. I think we pretty much know at this point. We also don't know who his mother is though, so that's still a mystery. But it probably wasn't the woman we now know as Apocalypse's wife in the main continuity thanks to modern X-Men books, Genesis. Which is also kind of a confusing name for her to have in regards to Apocalypse's and X-Men history, but anyways. Nemesis, being an ally and horseman of Apocalypse, ends up being a major antagonist and problem for the X-Men in this universe, who are led by Magneto, as Professor X is dead in AOA, which is kinda, you know, what helped bring about this whole dread alternate reality of Earth 295, aka Age of Apocalypse. Number 8. Dark Riders. Oh boy, the Dark Riders. What a weird group. No wonder we haven't seen them that much. The Dark Riders are believed to be Inhumans who for some reason allied themselves with Apocalypse, seemingly believing in his vision of a mutant-dominated world and his ideology of survival of the fittest. I don't know how Apocalypse convinced them that this was a good idea, but they do seem to be pretty into it, I'd say, so I gotta assume that he was just like really persuasive and didn't just straight up threaten them. But still, it's a whole weird thing. The Dark Riders, they're weird. The original roster included team members Foxbat, Gauntlet, Tusk, Hard Drive, Synapse, and Barrage. I mean, I feel like that also just says it all. Listen to those names. The Dark Riders.
Number 7. Stiltman. First appearing in Daredevil number 8, Stiltman was a scientist named Wilbur Day who stole the plans for a hydraulic ram device in order to create telescopic metal legs, which allowed him to tower above the people of New York as Stiltman. He used the power of being tall to attack the scientist, Carl Caxton, multiple times in hopes of stealing the scientist's shrink ray. On one of those occasions, he hoped to use the device to shrink the Golden Gate Bridge, but was defeated by Daredevil and Black Widow. Surprisingly, the ability to be tall has not made Stiltman an effective supervillain, and he has been defeated with relative ease by multiple heroes in the Marvel Universe. Number 6. Bushhacker. Although he was originally a Catholic priest, Carl Burbank renounced his vows upon the death of several of his young parishioners. In what may just be the most extreme career pivot in history, he joined the CIA, where he got a cybernetic arm that he is able to transform into a gun. After leaving the CIA, he became a freelance assassin who specialized in killing his targets in artistic and aesthetically pleasing ways. He has fought against Daredevil and other heroes such as Wolverine and the Punisher, and has worked for a variety of employers including the Kingpin, the Hood, and the US Hulk operations. He's been a consistent presence in the Marvel Universe over the years, but is rarely the main villain, usually working as a pawn in a more prolific villain's schemes. Number 5. Iari. During Mark Waid's excellent run on Daredevil, Bullseye was confined to an iron lung after being defeated by Daredevil. He had Lady Bullseye hire a new threat named Iari to kill his rival. Bullseye had Iari experimented on with the same toxic waste that gave Matt his abilities and had him trained to be just as effective a fighter as Matt. In their first encounter, Iari lured Matt to a warehouse and confronted him dressed in Batlin Jack Murdoch's old robe and a costume modeled after Matt's original yellow and red number. They fought to a standstill and Matt tried to negate Ikari's radar sense by turning on the building's sprinkler system, only to learn that although he had radar sense, he was not blind. He could have killed Matt, but he decided to let Matt live in fear of his eventual death at his hands. The two fighters got their rematch when Iari was hired by the Kingpin to fight Murdoch to the death. Kingpin had Matt's loved ones kidnapped and informed Daredevil that if he won the fight, he would have one of his loved ones executed. Daredevil and Iari fought for hours until the Shroud intervened and seemingly killed the assassin. The body disappeared soon after, but his severed head was later seen as a trophy in Kraven the Hunter's island hideout in Captain America number 697. Number 4. Blackwing. The son of the crime boss Silvermane, Joseph Manfredi learned how to train and control bats to do his bidding. This brought him to the attention of the villain Ringmaster, who offered Joe a position in his circus of crime. Joe accepted and created a very familiar looking suit that gave him limited flight abilities, and he began committing crimes with his trained mutant bats. Because the more obvious name had already been taken, he started calling himself Blackwing. The circus of crime came into conflict with Daredevil, who defeated them, capturing everyone but Blackwing, who managed to escape. He tangled with Daredevil a couple more times and also fought other heroes such as Black Widow, Captain America, and the Falcon before giving up the bat theme and becoming a regular crime boss like his father. Probably for the best, as his decision to straight up dress as Batman was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Number 3. Manbull. Bill Torrens was a common criminal working for the evil android Mr. Klein with his partner, Itch. He was tasked with kidnapping people so they could be used in Klein's experiments. When Daredevil intervened, Bill was forced by his employer to be a test subject. The experiment transformed him into a super-sized bull man named Manbull. Daredevil defeated him and he reverted to his human self, being sent to prison for his crimes. Itch later smuggled him in a revised formula which permanently transformed him into the Manbull and allowed him to escape from prison. He has teamed up with other Daredevil enemies such as the Owl and, ironically, the Matador, and has also fought heroes such as the Hulk and Scarlet Witch, but isn't a particularly well-known Marvel villain. He did, however, recently make the jump to live action when he appeared as a member of the Abominations group therapy session in the She-Hulk TV show. Number 2. Robert Goldman. Robert Goldman was a classmate of Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson at Columbia Law when they were all training to be lawyers. He would go on to become the assistant district attorney and was the lawyer who arranged the deal which allowed Daredevil to keep his secret identity in exchange for a guilty plea when he was on trial for murder. It was later revealed that he is actually Matt's guardian angel who has been manipulating the horrible events of Matt's life in order to make him a better hero. He has claimed responsibility for the death of Elektra's father, causing Matt's stint in prison and influencing Elektra's death at the hands of Bullseye. He also influenced and helped the FBI agent who revealed Matt's identity back in the Bendis run, sent Typhoid Mary to the Kingpin, and caused a train explosion that almost caused the death of Matt's girlfriend, Kirsten McDuffie. This is a very recent development in the Daredevil canon, so we have yet to see how valid these claims are, or how much of an impact this villain will leave with readers, but their confrontation has certainly left the Man Without Fear shaken to his core. Number 1. Death's Head. The father of longtime Daredevil love interest Karen Page, Paxton Page was a famous scientist who created a cobalt bomb. When he refused to sell the bomb to anyone, including the US government, he was called a traitor and became a recluse, living with his wife Penelope out in their creepy old mansion. He continued to experiment with the radiation and developed powers which allowed him to manipulate cobalt radiation, being able to form and throw fireballs at his enemies. He was driven mad and began dressing as a figure from Karen's childhood nightmares, wrapping himself in bandages and wearing a skull-like mask. He developed a formula which turned everything but the bones on his horse invisible and began haunting the grounds of his mansion like a Scooby-Doo villain. While fighting Daredevil in his secret laboratory, a vat of molten cobalt tipped over and almost killed his daughter. He regained his senses for a moment and pushed Karen out of the way, getting caught in the spill himself and killed. He was only featured in 2 issues of the comics, Daredevil Volume 1 issues 56 and 57, but given how things ended for his daughter, a story featuring him returning for revenge on Daredevil could be a lot of fun.
Number 10. Donald Blake. Donald Blake may be one of the characters fans of Thor in the comic are most familiar with of those on our list. He has made more appearances than others for sure, but he is better known in the comics as a version of Thor and later as his ally as opposed to his enemy. Donald Blake sort of used to be Thor, but then he became his own separate entity, but then he still helped Thor. However, in recent years, Donald Blake has become the enemy of Thor after he was locked away in a fantasy realm. Having learned the truth of his false existence there, he called to Thor for help, but when Thor never answered, Blake began to unravel, believing that Thor had abandoned him. He started to strike out first at those who he could, the fake beings living inside the dream reality with him. But once free from reality and back in the real world, Blake came after as many Thors as he possibly could as he sought revenge. Blake vowed to destroy all who did or had carried the mantle of Thor. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love obscure Thor villains, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button on this video. Thumbs up. Number 9. King Laufey. Laufey is known for being the leader of the Giants of Jotunheim. In fact, he is technically Loki's biological father, with his wife Farbauti being Loki's birth mother. Laufey hasn't made too many appearances, and this could be because although he is a giant and you'd think he would be a massive threat as the king of all the Giants of Jotunheim, he actually doesn't seem to be that tough. Multiple times Laufey has been defeated and killed, and multiple times he's returned only to be defeated again. Thor has even prevented Laufey from being resurrected in the past as well. So while he is a fearsome foe to behold with a lot of sway and loyal followers, he probably hasn't made too many appearances because, well, half the time he's usually busy being dead. In fact, I'd say more than half the time he's pretty dead. Number 8. Serpent. Carl Borson is likely a villain who would be less well known by classic comics fans who have since fallen off reading, or just anyone who might not be as up to date on their modern comics or, only started reading modern comics in recent years. Carl Borson made his first appearance in part of the Fear Itself event, appearing in issue number 1. He was introduced as the god of fear, Odin's brother, who was the rightful ruler of the 9 realms, at least initially, the All-Father prior to Odin. However, due to the fact that he did not keep his word when it came to listening to his brother's counsel once he became All-Father, and also chose to rule with fear, he ended up being usurped. Odin could not bring himself to kill his brother and so decided to seal him away deep beneath the ocean. Typical Odin move in my opinion. The reason we never saw Kull until 2011 in the comics was because of his origins, with him being imprisoned for eons. He only emerged during Fear Itself, but was of course defeated and later was killed again during War of the Realms. He's definitely spent more time dead than alive in regards to Thor's overall narrative in the comics.
Number 7. Mr. Doll. Look, sometimes Marvel had to get really creative in their earlier days. They were still figuring out what worked and what didn't. I'm not saying that Mr. Doll, aka Nathan Dawley, who appeared in Tales of Suspense number 48 in 1963, didn't work. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying actually. Yeah. The concept is actually quite a familiar one, almost like it's been done before by another comic book company. Dwarf Dolly came into possession of what was essentially a voodoo doll that could be shaped into whoever he intended the victim to be, and he got really good at reshaping it, using the doll to inflict pain on businessmen until they handed over their companies to Dolly himself. He came into conflict with Iron Man, and he did actually defeat the hero the first time, but we all know that isn't going to last, and somehow Iron Man used an energy blast to make the doll resemble Nathan himself, and the villain's attack backfired. He then got his mind implanted into 2 mannequins who took themselves after the Brothers Grimm, and I don't think any of us were expecting that one. Not at all. Number 6. Gargantuas. Gargantuas was Iron Man's first real opponent after his origin story in number 39 of Tales of Suspense. For the follow-up, number 40, Marvel decided that his next adversary would be a gigantic robotic Neanderthal constructed by aliens who traveled to Earth 80,000 years ago. I guess these Goomba-looking aliens saw Neanderthals and thought that would make an excellent robot. And for those nearly 80,000 years, they didn't change the robot one bit, because when 2 of those aliens came to Earth in the modern day, they brought the club-wielding Gargantuas with them to lead the attack. Now, he did have mesmerizing abilities, which he used to force the citizens of Granville to build a wall around the city. Unfortunately though, for Gargantuas, one of those citizens had a literal date with Tony Stark, and so he went to investigate, eventually defeating the robot with incredibly powerful magnets that ripped it apart. Number 5. Spymaster. While other obscure villains tread into the realm of ridiculous and hilarious, Ted Calloway, or Spymaster, is just plain awesome. He has actually been a thorn in the side of Tony Stark, breaking into Stark Tower multiple times. In one arc, he was the one who put together a team of other underutilized Iron Man rogues, including our buddy Unicorn, and breaking into Stark Tower, stealing some of Stark's tech. He was even able to steal tech for Justin Hammer, which was the spark for the awesome Armor Wars story arc. He has eluded capture multiple times and even let the world believe he was passed away while he continued to operate in the shadows. Despite first appearing in 1971, he's just kind of always remained relatively unknown to the common audience member, and I think that's gotta change. Number 4. Dread Knight. Bram Velsing, for starters, has an incredibly strange name that is a very obvious reference to Bram Stoker and his character Van Helsing. But he is also not actually an Iron Man villain, not on Earth 616 at least. Bram Velsing, or Dread Knight, is really an enemy to Tony Stark in the Ultimate Universe. Unfortunately, in the 1610 universe, he just kind of becomes another Iron Man villain that creates an Iron Man-like armor. But in Earth 616, he is actually a Latvarian scientist who didn't like Dr. Doom's schemes and was punished by having a mask fused to his face. He became kind of like a villain to Dr. Doom in a way, allying himself with Victoria Frankenstein and the creations of Victor Frankenstein. He has fought Iron Man on a few occasions in 616 as well, but he's also fought Black Knight and Spider-Man. And I mean, an armored up man with a cool mask wielding a super cool lance riding a black winged horse? It's actually pretty cool. Number 3. Controller. I don't know what it is about Iron Man, but so many of his villains, even the obscure ones, are actually really neat. Granted, some are just dudes in suits, but what's cool is that for the most part they are other scientists or regular dudes who elevate themselves to something more. Controller is a prime example. Basil Sandhurst developed himself an exoskeleton to allow him to move and function after a terrible chemical accident. But with this tech, he also developed the ability to siphon and use the mental energy of others to control them and read their minds. Eventually, this technological ability became one he just possessed on his own, and it's caused him to go up against some real heavy hitters, including different iterations of Captain Marvel. But he will always hold a feud against Iron Man, Tony Stark, for all the times the Golden Avenger has defeated him. Number 2. Arsenal. Arsenal may actually be known to Iron Man readers. Originally, Arsenal was actually a creation of Howard Stark, Tony's father. It was a prototype robot weapon created by Howard during the Cold War. Now there are actually 2, Arsenal Alpha and Arsenal Beta, but we will mainly be talking about Beta. What makes this villain more imposing for Tony himself is the fact that Arsenal Beta's neural processors were based on Howard himself. Plus, he had a sophisticated guidance AI named Mistress, which was actually based on engrams of Tony's mother, Maria. Arsenal contains both Tony's mom and dad, huge influences in his life, making any battle with Arsenal a much more personal one. More recently, Howard and Maria, or Arsenal and Mistress, were both uploaded to Tony's E-scape, and thanks to Arno Stark, they were even given human forms, but unfortunately they will never truly be Tony's parents. And in at number 1 is Madame Mask. Yes, I know she isn't really the most obscure, but she is cool as hell, and not everyone knows about Guiletta Nefaria. Nefaria, working under her father, Count Lucino Nefaria, became the leader of the massive Magia crime family, and in one of her first moments she actually attempted to infiltrate Stark Industries by charming Jasper Sitwell. Only, she actually ended up getting feelings for him and then got into an accident that disfigured her, which is when she got the golden mask that granted her the name Madame Mask. She has remained a villain to Iron Man for a long time, playing a bit more of a hands-on part, although behind the scenes, in Dark Reign and Secret Invasion, which is where she developed a relationship with the villain, the Hood. She remained a decent level threat for a long time, even fighting Moon Knight and Hawkeye, and there was also a point where she acquired a number of magical artifacts that gave her actual power outside of the Magia. Thanks to her less than ideal relationships with Midas, Jasper Sitwell, Tony Stark, and her own father, plus her incredibly hard childhood and facial disfigurement, she is an incredibly compelling character with depth many other somewhat obscure villains just can't match.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have the Thousand, aka Carl King. The Thousand made a brief but memorable appearance in the comics, beginning with Spider-Man Tangled Web number 1. Back in 2001. Carl's origin story is quite compelling, as he actually witnessed Peter Parker obtain his powers by being bitten by the radioactive spider. He's clearly upset and a tad jealous. The opening of the issue has him just staring out of a cafe window, just stewing in the fact that it should have been him instead of Peter Parker to get those powers, which, you know what, I understand, man. I say that every single time I watch a Marvel movie. So, making a terrifying entrance, he reveals himself as the Thousand. So instead of getting the same powers as Peter, he actually turned into 1,000 spiders. No, I don't like that. I feel sick looking at this guy. The last page of his first issue really pulls you in. It's his skin suit, like it's a skin as a suit, just chilling on a coat hook. while he takes over Miss Peyton, even revealing that he ate her from the inside out. He's a bunch of spiders that take over your body. No wonder we didn't hear much about this guy. Yuck. Next, get out of here. And before we move on with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please toss us a like down below. It's a big help to us here at our secret underground bunker. Thank you so much. Okay, back to these crazy villains. And coming in at number 9, we have the Spot. Making his first appearance in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 98, the Spot isn't exactly the coolest villain per se. I mean, he doesn't throw pumpkin bombs, he's not made of 1,000 spiders, but when Jonathan Owen was exposed to the spotted dimension during an experiment, his skin became white with black spots, and those spots acting as warps in space. Honestly, this character is super unique. In his second issue, you really see what he can do. He uses these portals to punch through space and hit his victims far away. He holds these portals like frisbees, and personally, I would love to see this guy fight Doctor Strange. The whole portal versus portal action alone would be mint. And they're both doctors. So why hasn't this happened yet? I don't know. Seeing Spider-Man use his portals to hit Thanos in Infinity War makes me think if the Spot was in a Spider-Man movie, it would be just hours of that. And honestly, that would be sweet, I'm here for it. I wish I was the Spot. Scratching your back would be so much easier. Instead of reaching and like trying to like pull your shoulders out, no thank you. Much better. Coming in at number 8, we have Swarm. Oh, you thought I was done with disgusting Swarm villains. No, think again. Fritz von Meyer made his debut in Champions issue 14 back in 1977. And as you can probably guess by his name, yes, he's made of a swarm of bees. Kind of like the 1,000, except somehow worse. He's also a scientist. So for sure worse, definitely worse. He used stolen gold to pay for all of his projects. So he's a Nazi beekeeper who steals gold. Great. You're a villain. You did it. So it's no surprise we haven't heard much about him. I mean, what a weird character. One day he found a beehive that was not like any other. So Fritz made a device that hoped would reawaken these bees, which he thought were like the end result of a mutation with a nearby fallen meteorite. The bees woke up, but then they continued to attack and kill Fritz, the beekeeper Fritz. No, not him. And then his consciousness was spread out through all of those bees, and now you have the Swarm. Literally the bee's knees. I don't care how tough you think you are, there's no chance you're going toe to toe with bees. There's no fight. If I was swinging around the city and a swarm of bees was robbing a bank, I didn't see that. I'm just gonna keep heading to Aunt May's. No worries. Headphones are going back in. Good luck. R.I.P. Good game.
Number 7, All Black. While Gore is likely well known now thanks to his appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, the All Black has yet to be introduced to us yet. Nor its creator, Null. These two characters might be more elusive to fans who have not dived deep into the well of comics. The All Black is basically like Venom, a symbiote, and in fact the first symbiote ever created by Null, the god of symbiotes. The All Black Necrosword ended up being retrieved a long time ago by Gore, the God Butcher. Well, Gore, and then he became the God Butcher, who used the All Black as an instrument of vengeance, possibly even becoming corrupted by its dark influence somewhat, because that's kind of a thing it does. He used the sword to defeat the gods in an effort to rid the universe of gods entirely, which is how the All Black became the enemy of Thor. Eventually, the All Black bonded fully with Gore, allowing him to resurrect even after he was killed. Both the All Black and Gore would be defeated by a team of Thors, but the symbiotic sword would later return in the future when King Thor was also faced with fighting Galactus. Thor would actually use the All Black in the fight, joining with it, and it would use him to get to Galactus, who the All Black would later bond with, turning Galactus from the Devourer of Worlds into the Butcher of Worlds. Number 6, Curse. Curse is Algrim the Strong. He was one of the Dark Elves who served Malekith, but was later betrayed by him. Due to the extent of his injuries, however, Curse cannot quite remember exactly what had really happened to leave him in such a fatal state, leaving him to believe that Thor was fully to blame, with Thor being the only person who he could remember was really involved at all. Curse's hatred for Thor was so powerful that the Beyonder sensed it and paid Curse a visit, deciding to grant him immense strength in addition to healing him. As such, Algrim became even stronger than ever and adopted the mantle of Curse, setting out to hunt down Thor. However, Curse would later remember the truth of Malekith's involvement in his initial demise and would later turn on him instead. Because yeah, Malekith kinda messed him up there. Number 5, the Midgard Serpent. While your Jormungand is known for being an iconic Thor villain in terms of mythos. The Serpent does not appear that much. In fact, Kolborson's Serpent, Thor's uncle, is probably more well known as a villain, and even he only really showed up a few years ago in the comics, first appearing just over a decade ago in 2011 in Fear itself. Oddly enough, although not his uncle, Jormungand is another Serpent who also happens to be related to Thor as well, being rumored to be his nephew, the son of Loki and Angrboda, both frost giants. Because Jormungand was believed to be a future threat to the gods of Asgard, he was banished, sent to the depths of the ocean on Earth, becoming known as the Midgard Serpent, with Midgard being the name that Asgard uses for the realm of Earth. And you know, that's apparently where serpents go. Number 4. Curse. There is not only one curse, but actually two in the comics. For a time, Lady Waziria took over as the new curse. Initially, she was a dark elf who, after being betrayed by Malekith herself, became his enemy, seeking revenge against him. As such, she joined up with the League of Realms, heroes from the 9 realms who had banded together to hunt down and apprehend Malekith. There's the 10 realms now, but it might have been the 9 realms only at that time. Later, Malekith would actually capture Waziria and force her to become the new curse, taking Algrim's place. However, she was only cursed for a few years, from 2017 to 2019 in the comics, so some might not remember this, and considering how Curse is pretty much fully covered, some may have not even known that this version of the villain was Lady Waziria herself, because you know, we don't really see much of her face or anything. Number 3. Those who sit above in shadow. To really understand the cycle of death and rebirth and why it happens is to know those who sit above in shadow. At least the cycle of death and rebirth as it applies to the Asgardians and the Norse gods. And also you have to be pretty deep in the Thor mythos to know of those controlling villains. They are beings who apparently orchestrate the death and rebirth of the gods, feeding off the energy of mass destruction and world-devastating events like Ragnarok. Thor himself was actually a part of Odin's plan to defeat those who sit above in shadow, which was shown to have succeeded, but then later was revealed to have not completely worked. Or to have completely worked, but then those who sit above in shadow, I guess, simply returned afterwards. You know how it is. Number 2. Seedring the Merciless. Seedring the Merciless only made a few appearances in the comics. Less than a handful, I believe. Seedring was initially one of the members of All-Father Odin's council. However, after Odin learned that Thor had revealed his true identity to Jane Foster, he decided to take away Thor's power as a punishment. Y'all know Odin, for years, was not a fan of Jane Foster. He definitely did not ship Thor and Jane together. But Odin could not bring himself to take Thor's power, and so had Seedring do it for him. However, Seedring became ambitious as a result of the newfound power coursing through his veins. Rather than pass it on to Odin, as he was, you know, supposed to do, he instead became an adversary of both Odin and Thor by attempting to usurp Odin, take over Asgard, and become the new Allfather instead. Number 1. Replicas. Replicas only appeared in one single issue, both making their debut in issue 141 of Thor, but also seeing their demise in the very same issue. I love a one-shot villain. Although I would say Replicas represented the real danger in this issue, Replicas was not alone when it came to their villainy. In fact, Replicas, also known as Replica Model X3, was actually an android created by the alien inventor Chutta. Chutta's secret mission was to prepare Earth for an invasion, and they created Replicas in the hopes of creating chaos on the planet's surface. The mob boss, Slugger Sykes, what a name, hoped to use Replicas, going into business with Chutta in the hopes of acquiring his own personal army of androids. However, when Slugger learned of Chutta's true intent, it put the two villains behind Replicas at odds with one another, and instead they kind of turned on each other. You know, Slugger lives on Earth, so he was like, I'm an Earth person, and I think you wanting to mess us up. Not so cool, Chutta. Even for me, a mob boss.
Number 10. The Red Barbarian. What better sign of the times than having an increasingly stereotypically generic communist Russian general as a villain? At least they gave him a unique name. The Red Barbarian was a general in the USSR army named Andrei Rostov, and along with his generic name, he was generically evil, wore generic medals on his generic brown fatigues, and drank a lot of very generic Russian party beverages. The Barbarian never really even engaged Stark directly. He mainly sent incredibly generic spies to go and steal some generic plans from the guy. And to just add to the icing on the cake, when the one interesting spy, the actor, managed to actually succeed in his mission, Andre didn't believe him and had taken him out. Andre did not believe him and had him taken out. He eventually just became another generic Russian guy taken out by the Winter Soldier. What a waste. Number 9. The Freak. Some of you may be surprised to learn that the Freak was actually Iron Man's best buddy, Happy Hogan. In some earlier Iron Man stories, Happy Hogan accidentally absorbs a large dose of cobalt radiation thanks to the Unnervator. This made him several times more powerful, which I gotta let you know is not how that works. Please do not irradiate yourself for superpowers. It will not go well. Nevertheless, in this form, he could discharge blasts of cobalt energy from his hands, had superhuman durability and strength, even becoming bulletproof, and he continuously radiated lethal levels of radiation which could have resulted in a nuclear explosion. Unfortunately, he was also just cray with this power, turning him into the Freak. Iron Man chased him and managed to lure him to his factory where he tricked him into walking into a maximum power burst of the Innervation intensifier, hoping it would turn him back to Happy Hogan, which it did. Number 8. The Unicorn. The Unicorn suffers from having probably the least threatening of names, and honestly, when he first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 56 in May of 1964, Milos Masaryk, which is how I'm hoping you pronounce that, was just a Soviet agent assigned to security duty for a bigger bad, Anton Vanko, who eventually became the Crimson Dynamo. Dynamo's second finished project was a helmet with radiation beam weaponry called a power horn. Vanko offered this invention to Masaryk and taught him how to use it. So, yeah, the Unicorn was essentially another villain's lackey, but he did eventually get enhanced with superhuman strength and stamina, not to mention near impenetrable skin. He also eventually turned the helmet weaponry somehow into a third eye that can fire energy beams. It looked much cooler, I'll agree, but he was kinda crazy and he still kept on just being muscle for other villains, last of which would be Korvac.
Number 7. Cassandra Nova. I love Cassandra Nova. With every issue of Marauders I am reading, I fall more in love with this strange and terrifying character. Cassandra Nova is basically Charles Xavier's evil twin, but she's also not a straight up evil twin. She is what the Shi'ar would actually call a Mumadrai. The Shi'ar believe that Mumadrai are basically evil twin spirits of newborns who must be defeated before said person can be born. So the idea with that is that basically we all before we were born fought an evil version of ourselves. They serve to represent the exact opposite of everything that we are. So in the case of Xavier, who is often presented as being a pretty good guy, though not always, Cassandra is pretty evil in comparison. While Xavier did successfully defeat her before he came into the world with his telepathic mutant powers manifesting while he was in the womb, because of his own psionic potential, Cassandra herself was powerful enough to survive this and eventually would return years later to fight against Xavier and his beloved mutants. Although in being Charles's twin, she herself is also basically a mutant, so yeah. She's a mutant, but she's also Mumadrai. Number 6. Nimrod. If we're talking about the new Nimrod, he is well known thanks to the current era, but even he is still somewhat obscure as an X-Men villain, considering that, he hasn't been around for too long and only appears in a few issues at this point. However, even going back and talking about the more famous Nimrod from the Days of Future Past reality, for those who are not familiar, this could actually still be a version of the character who is considered obscure. The main Days of Future Past reality is often considered to be Earth 811, which is where Nimrod hails from. Here, and even in the current main timeline of Earth 616, Nimrod is considered to be a super sentinel, a super advanced mutant killing and detecting machine. So if you thought the Sentinels were bad, woo! Wait till you meet Nimrod. He's crazy, even though his name is kinda dumb. That's why I love him though. Number 5. Harold Leland. Despite having recently returned, Harold is usually someone often left out when it comes to his involvement with the previous villainous group known as the Hellfire Club. Or well, he's kind of more, he's on the side. Harry's there, but maybe in the back. Well, really, the Hellfire Club has become 2 different entities at this point now as well, with one remaining pretty villainous and the other being a somewhat altruistic Krakoan-based business known as the Hellfire Trading Club. Prior to Harry's resurrection on Krakoa though, he was a pretty bad guy and member of the Hellfire Club, back when it was made up of villains, before it was, just about business and mutants and all that stuff. Throughout many of his Hellfire days, Leland was often often seen as the right-hand man to more well-known mutant villain Black King of the Hellfire Club, Sebastian Shaw. And those were also back in the days when the Hellfire Club just wanted to like rule the world. Although who knows, maybe the trading company does want to rule the world. That would be an interesting twist. Number 4, Charles Xavier II, or Charles Xavier II. Charles Xavier II is the child of Mystique and Professor X. Wait. What? Yep, at one point these two had a child together, and in the main continuity too. That happened. Well, we don't really know fully what happened to this child in the main continuity, who I feel like we kinda just forgot about, who Mystique also gave up for adoption, surprise surprise. We do know of an alternate version of the character who actually gets a bit of a story in the reality of Earth 13729, where he joins up with his half-brother Reyes and basically becomes a villain. So that's the version we're focusing on for this point. Charles Xavier II accidentally kills his adoptive mother when his powers emerge, causing him to seek out his birth mother, Mystique. However, she is no longer around because she has been killed at this point by his half-brother, Reyes. Charles II then decides to create his own team of X-Men, believing that the current team has disgraced his father's name, who is also dead at this point. However, he's not a very good guy at all, and instead of inspiring a team of mutants to, be better, he just uses mind control to get them to join him, giving them just enough awareness and control to kind of realize what's happening to them, but not enough that they can actually do anything about it. Yikes, that's really evil, man. That's really evil. Like, he could have just mind controlled them and been like, then you just won't be aware. But no, he was like, I want you to know what's happening. Number 3, Horiculture. Horiculture are such an awesome group of villain ladies. I really hope they do continue to appear for years to come and become super mainstream and not obscure. Like, I want to see them in the MCU. They deserve a live-action adaptation despite being pretty new. They made their first appearance in the 2019 X-Men series in issue number 3 and are a group of villainous women who plan to take over the world by controlling seeds and crops. In essence, they hope to drastically diminish the human population of Earth to return the world to a more natural state, thereby deciding through controlling seeds and crops as botanical scientists who will live and who will die. Number 2, Lucifer. Lucifer is another super old school villain who you may have forgotten about, or you never knew about to begin with perhaps. But you know who didn't forget? I didn't forget. I did not forget back when Professor X weirdly implied that Lucifer, as in maybe the devil at the time that he was bringing it up, was the one behind him losing the ability to walk. That happened at one point, and I was like, what is happening here? Now, Lucifer is not actually Satan though. He's not that Lucifer. He's actually an alien from outer space. I don't think it makes it better. Lucifer is a Quist from the planet Quistelium. He originally came to Earth to conquer it, but was foiled by Xavier, so he basically dropped a big rock on him. I'm not joking, that's pretty much what happened. Although initially implied to maybe be the devil, we later learn he is just a super advanced and intelligent alien dude. Though not too intelligent because, the X-Men do defeat him. Number 1, Cordyceps Jones. Cordyceps Jones is one of the newest villains to pester the X-Men. He actively fought against the most recently retired roster in the current run, before Forge, Firestar, Iceman, Magic, and Havoc joined the team. Cordyceps Jones, however, only recently went up against the X-Men, having targeted Earth by putting a bounty on it after encouraging people to gamble on its destruction at one of his massive cosmic casinos, Game World. Prior to that, he made his first appearance in the 2017 Rocket series in issue number 4, which is also why Rocket was the one to help the X-Men with finding Game World and infiltrating it. Thankfully, they had a direct link to him through a team member at the time, Rogue, whose husband Gambit is a fellow friend of Rocket's through their shared love of gambling. We also learned in their pursuit of Game World and Cordyceps Jones that Gambit's secret nickname for Rocket is Small Blind. Cordyceps Jones might be newer in the comics, having appeared in less than 10 issues at the time of this recording, but he's actually an ancient threat, being over 30,000 years old and also being a giant parasitic fungal spore. He and obscure Wolverine villain Spore actually could probably do some crazy damage should they ever team up. That would be pretty wild. If you're watching this and you're from Marvel, make that happen. That sounds like a cool team up actually. And now we know Spore is maybe alive.
Number 10, Microwave Man. Also known as Louis Paget, we meet this villain in Action Comics number 487 in 1978. A space traveler, he returned to Earth after 40 years of flying through the stars aboard an alien spacecraft. Before he began his journey, he was already the costumed villain Microwave Man. Upon returning to Earth, he calls on his alien friends to grant him his youth back, but it comes at a cost. His life will be shortened to just a few hours. He says, yeah, I'm good with that,
He just wants the opportunity to defeat Superman. So Superman agrees and even allows Microwave Man to defeat him in a test of strength. Lewis dies satisfied, and the aliens claim his body and they set him adrift in space. It's a touching story in which the villain is dispatched within 2 issues, meaning we will probably never see him again. It's nice though. Hey gang, before we hit number 9, I really need you guys to hit that like button. It's not required, I will continue with the list either way, but we do appreciate it. Number 9, Sand Superman. First appearing in Superman 233 in 1971, Sand Superman is exactly what he sounds like. Created from a portal between Earth and the Quorum dimension, Sand Superman just wants to drain Superman of all his power and knowledge. However, as it gains energy, he also gains the desire to act like Superman, including serving unselfishly as a superhero. Unfortunately, Superman can't really take him on as a sidekick or anything like that for 2 reasons. 1, Sand Superman only gains power by taking it away from Superman. And 2, if they were to actually touch each other ever, Sand Superman's alternatively charged atoms would just result in a huge explosion big enough to destroy the entire planet. Sand Superman's story was really not all that lengthy, so it's pretty easy to see why he hasn't returned. Coming in at number 8, J. Wilbur Wolfingham. He would call himself a business consultant or philanthropist, but make no mistake, he is a con man. Mr. Wolfingham first appeared in Superman 341 and was erased from existence following the collapse of the multiverse during the Crisis on Infinite Earth series. In his debut, he has a scheme to sell amulets which allegedly teleport the wearer to safety if a disaster strikes. Superman comes along and decides to put this product to the test. This all happens in a story called The Man Who Could Cancel Catastrophe. In another story called Sale of the Century, Wilbur thinks he's pulled off a master scam by selling the Earth off to an alien real estate agent until the alien actually comes back, and then of course Superman has to come straighten everything out. This guy is seriously a real piece of work, but we haven't seen him again since 1985.
And coming in at number 7, we have Mindworm. In Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 138, we were introduced to William Turner. No, not that William Turner, although I'm sure he'd be great, he's probably fine. I'm talking about the telepathic, tragic, minor Spider-Man villain, Mindworm. Born with limited telepathic powers, he was the cause of his parents' untimely death, and he suffered from it for quite a while. So he grew up in an orphanage and protected himself from bullies using his mind powers, thus donning the nickname Mindworm. He's extremely smart. He even looks smart too, with his big giant brain head. He attacked Peter once by hijacking the minds of others to do the dirty work, so people just started attacking him randomly. What I like most about this villain is he tries not to be a villain, for the most part at least. He just feels this tremendous guilt after being born this way. I mean, it's not his fault. Number 6, Red Goblin. Green Goblin plus Carnage equals holy shit. Appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man 798, Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and then after that, it was just a nightmare. So Norman used the symbiote to eject all of the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mash, becoming the Red Goblin. Put them both together, very scary. The rare weaknesses that the symbiotes do have went away once the two had merged, right? So if you think you can use sound or fire to take this guy out, it's your funeral, no way. Green Goblin was fine with those things, so now the Carnage side of Red Goblin isn't affected either. Even the bombs that he used are like these Carnage pumpkin bombs that will like bite you. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. I'd love to see more of the Red Goblin, let's go. And number 5, Calypso. Making her first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 209, Calypso is a voodoo priestess who also happens to be the lover of Kraven the Hunter. After gaining her powers from sacrificing her own sister, it's safe to say she took the villain route. So what started out as her being the significant other to Kraven the Hunter soon turned into Calypso taking over the mind of the Lizard and using him. Not cool. You can see this take shape beginning in the Torment 5-part storyline. And with rumors of Kraven the Hunter being casted in the next Spider-Man flick, who knows, maybe we'll get a little sneak peek at Calypso as well. Fingers crossed. Number 4, the Red Vulture. Okay, so we talked earlier about the Red Goblin, so we might as well throw another big red in the mix while we're here. The Red Vulture made his comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man issue 592, and while some may see the Vulture as Adrian Toomes, The Red Vulture is actually James Natal. So James started off working for the mob, of course, and then after the workload kept increasing and increasing, he requested some help. So his superiors figured it would be a great time to use him as his test subject to make a new Superbad. Using the same technology that had created the Fly and the Scorpion, but with a little hint of, memory loss thrown in there, Spider-Man found this monstrosity during a patrol, and he saw him eating a guy. He has acid spit, so it's not too hard to eat a guy. Even Peter gets some acid in his eyes. I mean, where's an emergency eye wash station when you need it? And coming in at number 3, Carryon, aka Miles Warren, made his comic book debut back in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 25. His powers are pretty amazing. I mean, I would love to see more of this guy. Everything he touches turns to dust. It turns to dust, red dust. It's very bad. He's creepy looking. I mean, he also carries this little pouch side carry bag, so he looks creepy, but he also looks like he's running errands. So, I don't know. He's taking lives, but he's also late for work. He's a weird looking guy. The initial Carryon was actually a clone of the Jackal, but the virus had made it outlive that body. So now we're left with this. Super strength, telepathy, levitation, super speed. It's pretty hard to avoid the touch of Carryon, especially when he's motoring. This villain didn't last too long back in the late 70s, but he's interesting enough to check out. So go do that. And number 2. Morbius. We have to include Michael Morbius, the living vampire. I mean, after all, Jared Leto is set to take on the bloodthirsty mantle with a sneaky little peek at Michael Keaton's Vulture at the end of the Morbius trailer that we got earlier this awful year. A lot of people are wondering who this guy is now. Making his debut in Amazing Spider-Man 101, Michael Morbius was, of course, a scientist, and actually a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. Having a debilitating blood disease plus experimenting with bats to find a solution, you already know what's about to go down. The best part of his origin story is that when he meets Spider-Man for the first time, this just happens to be the time where Spider-Man is donning the 4 extra arms, and it's pretty entertaining. So Morbius, in his thirst for blood, is like, oh, that dude's got 6 arms, that's like a lot of blood. Oh boy, that would be pretty yummy. So Morbius attacks and does a pretty decent job. In comes Curtis Connors to help out. Or rather, turn into the lizard and make Spider-Man's day go from bad to worse. I'm pretty pumped to see Jared Leto take flight with Morbius. I mean, I'm also pretty sure Jared Leto's already a vampire to begin with, so I'm sure his method acting will really come in handy. And closing off the list, coming in at number 1, we have Tombstone, a notable villain in the Spider-Man PS4 storyline, and making his debut in the late 80s in Web of Spider-Man 36. Tombstone, aka Lonnie Lincoln, grew up bullied due to his physicality. He was born albino and much taller and stronger than others, so naturally he himself also became a bully too. See how it works? Don't bully people. There's an idea. Down the road, he embraced it and became one of the biggest, baddest hitmen out there, taking out the trash for Kingpin himself. Weighing in at almost 500 pounds and towering at the height of 6'7", Lonnie is strong enough to lift 6 tons. So if you're a fan of the Spider-Man game, you'll agree he's one of the hardest villains in that entire storyline, and for good reason.
You got some stones, Rick. Let's see if they break.
Number 10, Mr. Sinister. We were so close to getting Mr. Sinister in a film. He was hinted at in Fox's The New Mutants, which was basically held hostage for quite some time after the merger between Disney and Fox happened, and then when it was released, it didn't do so well. I still feel like there was stuff that was meddled with there, despite Josh Boone swearing that the cut that got released was basically untouched by the studios and was totally his intended cut. I do not buy it. I'm sorry, Josh Boone, I don't believe you. One of the things the film sets up, though, is a property where Nathaniel Essex could study mutants and even turn them into his weapons under the guise of helping to rehabilitate them. This place was known as the Milbury House, which was, of course, Mr. Sinister's ancestral home in the comics, and Milbury is actually a name that he uses while traveling abroad in the comics after becoming Mr. Sinister, kind of like one of his undercover names. It was the surname of his wife, Rebecca. It would be really cool to see a movie that solely focuses on Sinister, as he's such a complex character, and recently there's also been a sort of like Jekyll Hyde element added to his origin story that I think could make for a great X-Men horror film spinoff. And considering that's kind of what the New Mutants felt like it was doing, it was like a little bit like teen coming of age as well as a horror film, I really want that to happen. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, do not miss out on all of our cool content. Make sure you click that subscribe button and ring that bell so you get all of our notifications. Number 9, Mr. Freeze. While Mr. Freeze has made a few appearances in live action, he has never had his own solo film. He is one of the most complex villains around, which is why I think he would actually be a pretty admirable candidate overall. Mr. Freeze would be an interesting character to explore, considering he was made to be so altruistic in terms of his reason for villainy, and over the years he's just become more and more and more altruistic. However, some have taken him too far, I would say, to the side of sympathetic villain, and it would be nice to see a film that more finely strikes a balance on kind of where he stands between being a villain but also having his reasons. For those who are unaware, Mr. Freeze isn't just a man obsessed with cryogenics. He's a man and scientist whose interest in cryogenics turned to obsession after his wife Nora was diagnosed with an incurable disease. Rather than lose her, he decided to freeze her until he could find a cure. And there's also been other versions of the story where it's not just about him helping her. She may not even have been his wife. They may have never been married. He might just be obsessed with this woman. So there's lots of layers you could play with there. And his whole goal is apparently to protect Nora, preserve her, protect her, and that tends to be his motivation for turning to crime in terms of how he and his story are depicted in the modern era. Now, whether or not she's actually his wife, you could play with that, I think, in the film. I think it could be interesting. Number 8, Arcade. I was just thinking about Arcade the other day when I was doing a reaction to the new Saw film trailer. It's interesting to me how this idea of playing a game where the stakes are at their most high with lives on the line is kind of a universal concept at this point. We see this idea echoed across various films and projects, a perversion of the concept of a game. Look at Battle Royale, Hunger Games, Squid Game, Saw, fun in games to an extent, Ready or Not, and honestly so many more. Arcade is a villain who embodies this twisted idea. He likes to trap people in his own vicious game, often devising an elaborate maze or landscape of death traps typically known as Murder World. While he's not the most powerful villain out there, he's definitely super interesting, and he represents a concept that people universally seem to be both attracted to and kind of repulsed by, which could make for a very interesting film.
Coming in at number 7, Funny Face. We meet Funny Face in Superman 19 in 1942, making him possibly the oldest villain on this list. In his story, Case of the Funny Paper Crimes, he brings some villains to life from a comic strip, including Machine Gun Mike and the Black Raider. And he sends these guys out to rob the stores of Metropolis in a super dastardly evil scheme. Just go out there and rob everything, you guys. Superman takes them on one at a time, eventually figuring out what's going on and that they've come from the funny pages. While Superman is busy, Funny Face kidnaps Lois Lane and transforms her from a real person into a comic book character. Superman forms up a team with some other comic strip heroes that have been brought to life, and together they rescue Lois and take down the villains. This guy last appeared in 1986, and I seriously hope we see him again. He's crazy looking. Oh man. Number 6, Mr. Mixzipple. Jeez, is that an L in there? Anyway, the name is intended to be unpronounceable. We'll just call him Mixie. First appearing in Superman Volume 2 in 1987, Mixie is an imp from the 5th dimension who periodically visits and gives Superman a hard time. He first appears as a dashing young man by the name of Ben DeRoy and convinces Lois Lane to marry him. Superman eventually puts 2 and 2 together, and the imp agrees to go back home if Superman can get him to type, spell, or say his name backwards. Not Superman's name, but the other guy's crazy name. So, this evil, nefarious dude, he creates a giant typewriter and he makes up a name on the spot, choosing the name I mentioned earlier, figuring, oh, this is gonna be impossible for Superman. Superman defiantly says something along the lines of, "You couldn't even type that name forwards." And so Mixie does it and demonstrates, not realizing Superman has already rewired the typewriter, causing Mixie to write his own name backwards, banishing himself. He once even tried to do nice things, granting people's wishes, but not in the right way. For example, a woman wishes that her dough would finally rise, and it fills her entire home, pouring out onto the street. Another scene has a bunch of people wishing they had a Riverview apartment, so he makes their building sprout legs and literally walk over to the river. This villain did appear in 2008, but I think he still counts as forgotten. And honestly, he's too bizarre for me not to mention. Number 5, Black Rock. First appearing in Justice League America number 43 in 1990, Peter Silverstone was an American scientist. the Director of Research and Technology for the United Broadcasting Company. His task was to create a corporate-backed superhero that the UBC could provide exclusive coverage of. He creates a suit that gives the wearer power over broadcasting frequencies. The suit is powered by a mysterious sentient black stone. Silverstone manipulated his boss and his nephew into wearing the suit before he finally tries it on for himself. Sad to say though, after years and years of butting heads with Superman and losing, he becomes a washed up, failed villain who hangs out with guys like Kite Man. Eventually, he is driven mad by overuse of the Blackstone powers and winds up getting killed by Sam Benjamin, who then steals the stone and becomes the new Black Rock. Number 4, the Prankster. Oswald Loomis first appeared in 1988, the popular host of The Uncle Oswald Show, an early morning children's program. When ratings for his show plummeted and it was cancelled, Oswald totally lost it and went on a pranking spree terrorizing Metropolis. He once even held Lois Lane hostage and tried to marry her. Later in life, he sells his soul to Lord Satanus, and this changes him, making him young and athletic. He is a manic trickster who uses futuristic technology to create gadgets and weapons, all while retaining a comical theme. This guy doesn't come up as often as other practical joke-inspired villains such as Joker and the Riddler, so we haven't seen him for a bit. Number 3, Terra Man. When DC Comics rebooted everything with the New 52 in 2011, this guy was recreated to better suit a modern audience. But in 1972, he first appeared in Superman 249 as Tobias Manning, a desperado cowboy sent into the future. When he was young, he encountered an alien during his first holdup, while his father was recovering from a gunshot wound. The alien decides to take the boy and raise him for himself, taking him off into space and teaching him how to handle futuristic weapons. The alien, known as the Collector, also gave Toby a winged horse named Nova, which became his steed. He calls himself Terra Man and travels with the Collector, robbing and plundering all through space until his memories return, and one day he kills the Collector to avenge his father. He then travels to Earth, where he continues acting like a cowboy and performing nefarious evil deeds. He has some hilarious Western-themed gadgets, including an energy lasso and a chewing tobacco capable of aging Superman. Number 2, Dragorin. First appearing in 1971, Dragorin is the man from Transylvania. Transylvania is a miniature planet Superman visits with his friend Jimmy Olsen in Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen, Volume 1. Man, wouldn't it be nice to be Superman's pal? He's literally just a vampire. We think the writers might have been phoning it in a bit on this one. Throughout the story, Superman and Jimmy encounter not only Dragorin, but a werewolf too. I really wish I had more to tell you about this guy, but there is a reason that he's a forgotten villain. And now, number 1, Zavam the Invincible. This dude appeared in Action Comics 351 in 1967. Zavam was created by the god of Olympus after they looked into the future and saw Superman, believing him to be a rival god. Zavam was built from clay and sent off to defeat the Man of Steel. Using godlike powers making him seemingly unstoppable, he becomes the leader of the United Crime Syndicate and humbles Superman. Superman is only able to finally defeat Zavam after collecting a magical belt from another group of gods led by Neptune. Zavam's name is an anagram in reference to the godlike powers he possesses, including Zeus, Hercules, Achilles, and others. He has not reappeared since his defeat, but it would be nice.
Number 10, Deacon Frost. Deacon Frost is iconic due to his attachment to Blade, and I feel like a lot of people don't just forget about him, but by extension forget about Blade, which is why they forget about Deacon. I mean, it doesn't help that Deacon has kind of been dead in the comics for a few years now. But while you might have expected him to die in a Blade comic, we couldn't even give him that. Instead, he died in Falcon's comic, although at least, Blade was there. Blade was also in the comic. Deacon met his end in 2018 in Falcon issue number 8 from the second volume of the Falcon series. Fortunately, with us on our way to getting a new Blade feature film, there is a good chance Deacon Frost will see a resurgence of some sort. I don't know if we'll see him again in the comics, but odds are at least good we'll see a version of him once more on the big screen. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when I get to talk about villains villains. I know, I love it. Be sure to head on over to our villains playlist to check out even more good evil content. Number 9, Giganta. Giganta, for those who are unfamiliar, is a Wonder Woman villain. Why do we love her? Well, she's a giant ginger for starters, so I mean, that's pretty cool. But she also is a complex character. The first version of her to appear was actually just a giant ape who was genetically altered to be a human. I'm not kidding, that is really the story that we had originally for her. She first appeared in Wonder Woman issue number 8 back in the 1940s. That is how classic she is. However, from there, she'd get a less goofy backstory, but her character would always be somewhat goofy because she's still an evil genius thief, which is what I honestly like about her. I personally love when my supervillains and superheroes have an element of oddball fantasy to them, but I still want them to be somewhat grounded, you know? This is comics after all, and sometimes comics are kind of ridiculous. You can be ridiculous, but you can still have something to say as well. And that's what I love about villains like Giganta. Sadly, she doesn't get featured and remembered as much as you'd expect for someone who is literally a big deal. Number 8, Moonstone. Moonstone is one of those villains who I feel hasn't come up in a long time. Is she dead? I checked, and apparently, no. She's not. Moonstone was initially a major Captain Marvel villain from the days back when Carol was known as Miss Marvel, and I actually really love her as a villain for Carol. Captain Marvel doesn't necessarily have some of the strongest villains in comics, so I personally would love to see a return of Karla Sofin's Moonstone in the near future. Maybe we'll see her at some point in the new Captain Marvel series that just launched. Who knows? Number 7, Kite Man. Kite Man might be flying a little higher now that he's become a fan favorite thanks to his appearance in the Harley Quinn animated series, but we still have yet to get a live action version of this character. Honestly, the Harley Quinn animated series has also left me wanting more Kite Man as well. That combined with the amazing cosplays that I've seen based on that version, it's honestly inspired me to want to see Kite Man on a big screen. I could definitely see Kite Man fitting easily into James Gunn's DCU, that's for sure. So maybe James Gunn will give us a Kite Man movie. That would be kind of interesting. I think people would love it. I think it would be as successful, if not more successful even maybe than Peacemaker. Number 6, Madeline Pryor. Obviously, I can't talk about villains who deserve their own movie without highlighting one of my personal all-time favorites, Madeline Pryor. I also may selfishly want her to have her own film so I can get the chance to play her, but honestly, she's one of the greatest characters out there. So even if it wasn't me but someone else in that role, I would still be just super excited to have her up on the big screen. But Marvel, if you're watching, I have the skills and I would be happy to step into the Queen of Goblin's shoes if you would have me. Why does Madeline Pryor deserve her own film? Because she is one of the most complex villains out there. While she is a clone of Jean Grey, Madeline shies away from letting this define her or her character. And I'd even say there are layers baked into her character in actually relation to Jean and her relationship with her. She resents Jean, but she also admires her, putting her up on a pedestal. She also despises her, but at the same time, Maddie would not exist without her. Like I said, she may be Jean's clone, but that doesn't simplify anything for her character. It actually makes her more complex. Number 5, Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy has always been considered a classic character, and yet we haven't had a live action adaptation of her on the big screen for some time. We've seen her pop in here and there in TV shows, but I'm still waiting for the next big project where she can really soak up the limelight. Ideally, a very lime green limelight. I feel like a solo Poison Ivy film could be a great way to introduce Pam to an even larger audience in 2023 or beyond, and what better time for an eco-terror villain, honestly, or an eco-horror film, perhaps, than right now. This is basically what we're just dealing with on the everyday. So there's a lot you could play with, and I feel like people would be super here for it mentally. Number 4, Destiny. Destiny is a villain that until recently most folks had forgotten about because she was dead. In the films, she doesn't even really exist. And while I didn't mind the weird love triangle turned kind of love square in the X-Men First Class films between Mystique and Magneto and Professor X and Beast, I would like to acknowledge that those films pretty much erased one of Mystique's most important relationships from the comics. If not, I would say the most important relationship. The love between her and her wife, Destiny. Destiny for many years was allied with Mystique, and together they even adopted Rogue, with her being their daughter that they raised together. I would love a feature film that showcases Destiny and also highlights the love story of her and Raven. It would really be nice to have, considering how for so many years comic book censorship actually prevented them from even being a firmly established couple role in the comics, despite that always being Chris Claremont's intentions for their relationship with one another. Like literally, they were supposed to be the moms of Nightcrawler, and then that never happened. It's all censorship, baby. Number 3, Brother Blood. Brother Blood has recently had a comeback in the comics with his reappearance in the current Titan series. He's posing as a reformed villain currently, but I, for one, I'm skeptical about that. Honestly, he's just too good of a villain for him to be reformed in my eyes, and I'm hoping we get to see just how bad he truly ends up being, fingers crossed. Brother Blood is widely underappreciated, and even the recent live-action version of his character in Titans didn't really stand by himself, with him having direct ties to Trigon, who is his father in the show, instead of just worshipping Trigon. Like, I know he's always been somewhat connected to him, but he wasn't his son before. At least not any version of him that I've known in the comics. I personally feel Brother Blood stands on his own and prefer his own more bloodied past in the comics. I would love to see this version of his story brought to life in a standalone film. Honestly, it'd probably be pretty terrifying. Like, Brother Blood is scary, and he just doesn't get enough hype. Like, he's awesome in a scary way. Number 2, Doctor Doom. I mean, Doctor Doom isn't really so much forgotten by many of us. He is admittedly beloved by so many fans, but when it comes to the MCU, it does feel like he's been forgotten. He's one of the greatest, most complex villains around, and yet we haven't seen a live-action adaptation of him in years. So I'd argue when it comes to the films, at least, he has been forgotten. I would love to see a version of this character as a lead in his own film. Honestly, I don't even think you would actually even need to start with his origin. Doom has such a rich history as a character, there are many points you could feasibly begin his story from and focus on. I'd even say you don't necessarily need to have the Fantastic Four in his film. Now, while the FF did help to shape him, in the modern era, he's very much a villain who stands on his own and who could easily be matched up to fight against any hero. And also you can play with the fact of like him being a villain, but there also being some heroic elements, I would say, to who Doom is at times. Number 1, Clayface. Clayface is one of those villains who I don't think honestly just gets featured enough, and definitely has not been featured enough on the big screen. That is for sure. The interesting thing about Clayface, at least in regards to the main version of the character I'm most familiar with, Basil Karlo, is that he can transform into pretty much anyone he wants, which makes him an exceedingly interesting character in terms of how he could be depicted on the big screen. You could either have a series of different actors playing him as sort of a collective, or one actor who just gets to basically become the master of disguise, which honestly would probably be super fun. Either way, I think he's very intriguing in terms of his abilities. He is also surprisingly complex, having been redeemed a few times over the years, and even becoming, for a time, a member of the Bat family.
Number 10, Mr. Fear. Zoltan Drago was the owner of a failing wax museum who was trying to create a chemical that would bring his wax sculptures to life so that he could create his own private army. Unfortunately for him, his plan to have an army of wax celebrities would not come to pass because, you know, that's not how chemistry works. However, in his attempts, he did inadvertently manage to create a chemical that could be used to fill any foe with indescribable fear. So he said, meh, close enough, and he developed a gas gun that could shoot this formula, and he became Mr. Fear, presumably because Scarecrow was taken. He fought Daredevil a few times, making Matt have to live up to the moniker of the Man Without Fear. He was later killed by the villain Samuel Saxon, who took up the Mr. Fear mantle before he died and became the robotic villain Machinesmith. When this happened, Matt Murdock's rival from law school, Larry Cranston, became the third and current Mr. Fear. Number 9, the Jester. It's difficult to break into acting. It's a tough industry, as Jonathan Powers discovered. After years of struggling, the egotistical actor was cast in a production of Cyrano de Bergerac, but his performance was not well received, and he was booed by audience members, panned by critics, and fired after the show's opening night. After this, he decided to learn as many skills as possible to make himself a more versatile and hireable performer, taking up bodybuilding, gymnastics, and fencing, just to name a few skills. Perhaps due to his mammoth ego, he refused to take any actual acting lessons, and as a result could only find work on a children's show where he was constantly having pies thrown in his face. As all actors do, he eventually went insane, and with the help of the Tinkerer became the supervillain known as the Jester. He has gone on several bizarre crime sprees, such as when he used fake newscasts to convince people that JFK was alive and that the Vietnam War never occurred, which was probably written to be a goofy scheme back in the 70s, but in today's climate is just sad because it would probably work. He has tangled with Daredevil several times over the years, although he did retire for a time after successfully impersonating a famous actor named Benedict LaForge and performing the role of Cyrano on TV in Daredevil number 218. He actually did very well with the part, and this seemed to give him some much needed closure, although he did eventually return to a life of crime. Number 8. The Matador. Not to be confused with the Matador who fought Captain America back in the 1940s, Manuel Eleganto was introduced in one of Daredevil's earliest adventures, back when the hero was still garbed in his original yellow and red costume. His origin is very clearly laid out in a newspaper Matt reads in Daredevil number 5, so I'm just gonna pull a quote directly from there. For years, Eleganto was the most famous, most controversial bullfighter in all of Spain. His mastery of the bulls was unquestioned, but his cruelty and his brutality towards the bulls made the crowds hate him. In fact, in his last public appearance, the audience actually was heard to cheer for the bull. This so infuriated the temperamental Matador that he turned to hurl an epithet back at the cheering crowd. It goes on for a bit, but basically what happened is he got gored by the bull and blamed humanity, and decided to become a Matador-themed criminal. And by that I mean he would do stuff like stand in the street and throw his red cape at an armored truck's windshield, causing it to crash. Not exactly one of Daredevil's greatest threats.
Number 7. Taskmaster. Taskmaster is one villain who I feel like doesn't usually get enough love in the comics. The only time I see his fans emerging to proudly show their love and appreciate him is when Tony Masters becomes a different person entirely, like in his MCU appearance. Which, to be real with you, I actually didn't hate myself, but I know some people who were pretty perturbed by this because they were truly big Tony Masters fans. And when they explained to me some of the stuff they loved about him, including how sometimes goofy yet also badass he can be, I was genuinely moved. Tony Masters might not be my favorite villain in the comics, but he's definitely got a lot of passionate fans out there who notice whenever he's absent or whenever he's being underwritten in terms of his capabilities. Number 6. Mr. Sinister. Mr. Sinister is one of those villains that I personally have loved, and I know a lot of other people also have loved, but because he's so goofy, he doesn't usually get enough love. Enough coverage, I should say, in the comics. We don't talk about him as much as we should. I know he's ridiculous, but that's what makes him great. There are still many out there who are more casual fans who don't even pay him a thought. They might not even know who Mr. Sinister is, and if that's you, welcome on in, that's totally fine. And yet, among those of comic book and even animated X-Men fans, Sinister has always been one of the most intimidating and sometimes most fun villains. Sure, he did recently get his Sins of Sinister event in the comics, I'll give him that, which although right now I'm taking a year where I'm not staying as up to date with or collecting physically as much of the big two, I constantly heard great things about, and I cannot wait to give it a full read. But at the same time, this felt also like a resurgence of Sinister, this era, this Krakoan era, which we're now coming to an end of. Ever since Hellions, I feel like Sinister was on the up and up, but even now, where is he? What is he doing? It's very likely that once again he'll fall by the wayside and be forgotten, especially with him being in the pit, until someone else is ready once more to realize just how cool he is and bring him back into prominence again. Number 5. Shadow King. Remember when Shadow King was all the rage in the comics? Okay, so I don't know if he was ever really all the rage, but there was a time when he was considered to be one of the most fearsome villains that we had for the X-Men, and I remember it. Or at least, I remember it through reading about it when it happened. I wasn't actually alive when Shadow King first appeared, and I was only pretty little when he terrorized the X-Men as one of their star villains. But I've experienced the fear through going back and reading some of those older comics. You know me, I love 90s comics even though they're ridiculous. Shadow King hasn't been forgotten entirely today. He's still around, but he's just not quite as intimidating and fearsome as he once was during the era of stories such as, you know, the Muir Island Saga or the Psy War. Number 4. Catwoman. So I know what you're going to say. Amanda, how dare you imply that I forgot Catwoman? I would never. Yeah, I figured you might say that. But I'm not talking about forgetting Catwoman straight up in regards to this point, so hold those horses. I'm talking about forgetting where she came from. I feel like in modern comics, Selina is so often portrayed as an anti-hero, and even at times just a straight-up hero, that we forget her origin and her role as a villain. Even with her returning to the role of world's greatest criminal and training other criminals, she's got an altruistic angle here, I'd say. Although I do love that oftentimes this means her stories are far more focused on, you know, what really makes a person bad. It's an interesting question to pose, and I love when we explore it in the comics, but still the fact remains that Catwoman as a crook, for the sake of just thieving hasn't been a thing for quite some time, and I don't see her returning to that level of thief or criminal really anytime soon. As time goes on, I imagine most readers will continue to forget more and more just what Catwoman was once capable of and how dangerous she once dared to be. Number 3, Brother Blood. Brother Blood is just one of those villains who I think is so underrated. I mean, now we're getting to see more of him in Titans with him returning there, but ever since I found out about him, I wondered why he wasn't around more. After all, this is a villain who is like basically kind of a necromancer, or not really a necromancer, maybe a powerful hemomancer. The fact that Brother Blood can basically take control of any superhero he manages to get the blood of makes him not only insanely powerful, but also honestly quite terrifying. I personally have a fear of possession, and the fact that it is something which Brother Blood is capable of and relatively easily can do to someone, even someone as powerful as Superman, let's say, well, it's my most sincere kind of frightening. Number 2, Violator. Violator is another one of those villains who just pops up every now and then, making us remember just how cool and terrifying he is. For me, I first fell in love with the horrifying reality of this villain when I saw the Spawn movie for the first time back in the late 90s, and the Violator was always a character that just stuck out to me. That was the film that, although I wasn't aware of it at the time, probably also made me into a major John Leguizamo fan. And to this day, honestly, I still am. Violator for me is like pure fear incarnate. His appearance, his motives, his downright despicableness. I just think he's so iconic as a villain, which is why it's surprising that he tends to come and go in Spawn comics like the changing of the tide. Number 1, Black Manta. Seriously, I am so psyched for Black Manta in Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. In fact, I might be more psyched for Black Manta's return than I am for Aquaman. Sorry, Arthur. Black Manta is just one of those villains who is so interesting in that you kind of feel like, honestly, he's justified. I mean, maybe not all of his extreme actions, the actions themselves are justified, but his grudge feels personal in a way that you can sympathize with his own loss and his own pain. And honestly, that's what I love about him. It also makes him pretty brutal, but you can understand why he himself can excuse that behavior. That doesn't mean it deserves to be excused, but it does make him a pretty intimidating foe for Aquaman because he's so darn committed and willful, and sometimes he's kind of right. It also means that on the rare occasion when he chooses to ally himself with Arthur, he's often a powerful and equally intimidating ally.